In 2010, Capcom announced a new Devil May Cry game, and it was instantly hit with furious backlash. Dante's white hair was gone, his attitude was completely different, and the entire identity of the franchise had changed. To a lot of people, it looked like Capcom had taken one of their coolest characters and replaced him with a completely different person. And before DmC Devil May Cry even launched, many fans of the series had already decided it was a disaster. And 13 years later, people are still debating about this game. All because Ninja Theory tried a new take on the demon slaying and pizza eating story. Was it unfairly judged? Did people not give it a chance? Or was it just a complete disaster? Let's get stylish and find out. Let's start at the beginning. Internet outrage and a bad game aren't always the same thing. As loud as the criticism was, there's still one question nobody could answer until January 2013. Was DmC actually bad? Or had everyone made up their minds before they had even gotten their hands on the game? When the game finally launched, critics got their hands on it, fans got their hands on it, and for the first time the reboot had to walk the walk after talking the talk for 3 years. The results were complicated, to say the least. When the reviews started rolling in, something strange happened because despite all of the outrage surrounding the reboot, critics actually seemed to like it. Across the board, reviewers praised the combat, the level design, and Ninja Theory's fresh take on the franchise. Don't get me wrong, there were still criticisms about the story, the new version of Dante, and some people just preferred the tone of the original games. And then there was the user reviews. While critic reviews were average in the mid-80s, actual players were far less convinced. Some saw it as a great hack and slash and some saw it as an insult to the brand. And that's where the real story of DmC begins. Because it wasn't just the game being judged on its quality, it was also being judged on what it tried to replace. After replaying DmC all these years later, I think the strangest thing about the controversy is how much of the game is actually great. Let's start with the combat, because regardless of how you feel about the reboot, Ninja Theory absolutely nailed the fundamentals of a brilliant hack and slash. The combat is fast, fluid, and incredibly satisfying to play. Switching between angel and demon weapons feels seamless. Combat flows naturally into one another, and before long, you're just absolutely smiling from ear to ear from enjoyment. And I honestly think that's part of why the critics responded so positively to the game in the first place, because beneath all the controversy, it was an action game with genuinely excellent mechanics. Now, one criticism I do have is I think compared to the previous Devil May Cry games, DmC is much easier. Most of the bosses aren't particularly demanding, and it's rare that the game forces you to truly master its combat. For long-time fans, that was an understandably disappointing aspect at the time, but at the same time, it also made DmC one of the most accessible entries to the series. New players could jump in, experiment with combos, and feel stylish without being punished repeatedly. And while we're talking about things DmC did differently, I have to mention the platforming. Looking back at the series up to that point, this was comfortably the best platforming Devil May Cry had ever seen, but not because it was particularly difficult, it was just fun, and the environments constantly shifted around you. Limbo itself felt alive, and moving through the world became part of the enjoyment rather than a chore between fights. Now there's the presentation. Even now, I genuinely think it's one of the most cinematic Devil May Cry games. So many memorable set pieces and beautiful settings that made the entire game feel larger, and the succubus fight is probably the best example of that. It's not by any means a difficult boss, but as a whole it's fantastic. The visuals, the dialogue, the absurdity of the encounter combines to create one of the most memorable boss fights of the 7th generation of consoles, in my opinion. And that's DmC in a nutshell. It's not always the hardest game, it's not always the deepest game, but it's constantly trying to keep you entertained. Now the story. DmC opens with Dante living as a bit of an outcast. He spends his days partying, getting into trouble, and genuinely acting like he couldn't care less about the world around him. Typical early 20s activities. That all changes when he's pulled into limbo by a mysterious girl named Kat. She introduces Dante to the Order, a resistance group dedicated to fighting the demons secretly controlling humanity, led by none other than Virgil, Dante's twin brother. From there, the story slowly starts peeling back the layers of who Dante really is, and why he spends his entire life being hunted. The brothers learn the truth about their parents, the angel Eva and the demon Sparda, and how Mundus murdered their mother while hunting them as children. It's a pretty significant departure from the original games, but I actually like the reinterpretation of the story. The relationship between Dante, Virgil, and Kat forms the backbone of the entire narrative, and gives the game much more personal feelings than I was expecting. At the same time, Mundus himself is busy controlling the human world from the shadows. Instead of ruling through brute force, this version of Mundus uses money, media, and addiction to keep humanity in check. It's definitely one of the biggest departures from traditional Devil May Cry, but I always found it to be genuinely interesting. The gang then start to take down Mundus's army, starting with the succubus, who is the factory for the demon-spiked energy drink that the humans are addicted to, then exposing Bob Barbus, who uses the news cycle to twist certain narratives in favour of the demon world. Pushing Mundus further and further into desperation, there's a real sense that Dante is slowly tearing apart everything the demon dictator has built. Things massively escalate when Dante and Virgil kidnap Lilith, Mundus' mistress, in an attempt to force his hand. She was also pregnant with Mundus' child. As you'd expect, that goes well. Mundus retaliates, the conflict spirals out of control. Before long, the city is descending into chaos. Eventually, Dante confronts Mundus himself, and brings an end to his reign once and for all. But defeating Mundus was never the actual end of the story. The real conflict was always between Dante and Virgil. While Dante sees humanity as something worth protecting, Virgil sees it as something that needs to be controlled. With Mundus gone, the brothers finally stop fighting the same enemy and then start fighting each other. It's a twist that most Devil May Cry fans probably saw coming a mile away, but it still works because the game spends so much time building up their relationship beforehand. And honestly, I think that's why the ending lands as well as it does. By the time Dante and Virgil clash, it doesn't even feel like a random final boss fight, it feels inevitable. Is it the best story in the franchise? No, but I genuinely think it's one of the most entertaining. It's a bold reimagining of Devil May Cry that took risks, and while not all of them paid off, I think the story deserves a lot more credit than it actually gets. DmC also includes the Bloody Palace, the infamous survival mode. Now I only made it to around level 40. I'm hardly a Bloody Palace veteran, but it does exactly what all the others do. Throws endless waves of enemies at you and lets the combat system do its thing. If you enjoyed DmC's gameplay, you'll probably get a lot more mileage out of Bloody Palace than I did, to be fair. Despite what some people might tell you, DmC didn't kill Devil May Cry. In fact, after the reboot, Capcom eventually returned to the original timeline with Devil May Cry 5 and gave fans exactly what they asked for. But what's interesting is not everything from DmC disappeared. A lot of the fluid movement, environmental storytelling, and cinematic presentation that Ninja Theory brought to the franchise can still be felt in the later entries. So while the reboot itself may have been left behind, some of its ideas definitely weren't. And that's why DmC occupies such a strange place in the series' history. It wasn't the future of Devil May Cry by any means, but it wasn't a mistake either. So after replaying DmC Devil May Cry all these years later, what do I actually think? Well, despite all the controversy, despite the backlash, and despite the fact that some fans still refuse to acknowledge its existence, I genuinely think it's a great game. Is it the best DmC? No. Is it better than Devil May Cry 3 or 5? No. But I also don't think it deserves anywhere near the level of hate it receives. Beneath the divisive redesigns, the edgy dialogue, and all the controversy surrounding it, the reboot is genuinely entertaining. The combat is fluid, the presentation is incredible, the story is far more interesting than people give it credit for, and most importantly, it never stops trying to entertain you. I completely understand why long-time fans rejected it back in 2013. What I don't understand is why, more than a decade later, some people still talk about DmC as if it's one of the worst games Capcom has made. Because it isn't, not even close. DmC might not be the Devil May Cry game everyone wanted, but I think it's a Devil May Cry game that deserves a lot more respect than it gets. And after replaying it all these years later, I can safely say my opinion hasn't changed. Anyway, that's just my take. Let me know what you think of DmC Devil May Cry in the comments. Did Ninja Theory deserve the backlash, or was it an unfairly judged reboot from the very beginning? If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more nostalgia trips like this. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.